Swear to tell the truth concerning what will be asked you touching the faith, and what you shall learn.
Of my father, of my mother, and of all that I have done since I arrived in France, I will willingly swear.
Joan, on her knees and with both hands on the book, a missal, swears that she will speak the truth about all that is asked of her.
What are your names and surnames?
In my town they called me Jeanette, and since I came to France I have been called Joan. As for my surname, I know of none.
Where were you born?
I was born in the town of Domremy, which makes one with Greux. It is in the place of Greux that the principal church is.
The names of your father and mother.
My father was called Jacques d'Arc and my mother Isabelle.
Where were you baptized?
In the church of Domremy.
Who were your godfathers and godmothers?
One of my godmothers was called Agnes, another Jean, another Sibyl. One of my godfathers was called Jean Ling, another Jean Bar. I had many other godfathers and godmothers, as I have heard my mother say.
Who was the priest who baptized you?
Master Jean Minet, to the best of my belief.
Is he still alive?
Yes, I think so.
How old are you?
As far as I know, about 19 years old. And it was from my mother that I learnt Pater Noster, Ave Maria, Credo. Nobody taught me my belief, if not my mother.
Did you learn any trade in your youth?
Yes, to sew linen cloths and to spin. For spinning and sewing let me alone against any woman in Rouen. When I was in my father's house, I busied myself with the housework.
Did you confess your sins every year?
Yes, and to my parish priest, and when he was unable, I confessed to some other priest with his permission. Once or twice or thrice, as I think it was, I confessed to begging friars, that was in the town of Neufchâteau, and I received the sacrament of the Eucharist at the feast of Easter.
Did you receive this sacrament of the Eucharist at feasts other than Easter?
Pass over that.
The evidence here given by Joan herself was confirmed by the folk of Domremy, who had known her from her infancy or childhood.
Did the people of Domremy take the Burgundian side, or that of their opponents?
I knew only one Burgundian there, and I could have wished his head cut off, however, only if it pleased God.
In the town of Maxey, were they Burgundians or enemies of the Burgundians?
They were Burgundians.
Were you ever with little children who fought for the side which is yours?
No, I have no memory of that, but I did see that certain people of the town of Domremy had fought against those of Maxey, whence they came back sometimes much wounded and bleeding.
In your extreme youth, had you great wish to go out against the Burgundians?
I had a great will and desire that my king have his kingdom.
Did you take the animals out to pasture?
I answered that elsewhere. When I was quite big and had reached the years of reason, I did not generally guard the animals, but I did help to take them to the meadows and also to a fortified place which was called the Isle, for fear of men-at-arms. But I do not remember whether in my childhood I guarded them or not. For fear of the Burgundians, I left my father's house and went to the town of Neufchâteau in Lorraine, to the house of a woman named La Rouse, where I stayed for about 15 days.
Isablette, wife of Gérardin d'Épinal, Joan went to Neufchâteau with her father, her mother, her brothers and sisters who, because of the soldiers' gens de guerre, took their animals to Neufchâteau. But she did not stay there long, and she came back to Domremy with her father, as I witnessed, for she did not like living there and said that she preferred to live at Domremy.
Quite close to the town of Domremy, there is a tree called the Lady's Tree, and others call it the Fairy's Tree, near which is a spring of water. And I have heard tell that those who are sick and have the fever drink the water of this spring, and ask for its waters to recover their health. I have witnessed this myself, but I do not know if it cures them or not. It is a big tree called beech from which fine maypoles are made. It belonged to Messire Pierre de Berlaymont, knight. Sometimes I went out with the other girls, and by the tree made garlands of flowers for the image of Our Lady of Domremy. I have seen the girls put such garlands on the tree's branches, and sometimes I myself put some on, with the others. Sometimes we took them away with us, and sometimes we left them there. I do not know whether, since I reached the age of discretion, I ever danced about this tree. I may well have danced there with the children, but I sang there more than I danced.
What made you cause a certain man at the city of Towel to be summoned for breach of promise of marriage?
I did not have him summoned, it was he who had me summoned. And there I swore before the judge to speak the truth, and in the end he roundly said that I had made the man no promise whatever. The first time that I heard the voice, I promised to keep my virginity for as long as it should please God, and that was at the age of 13 or thereabouts.
In the Middle Ages, a promise of marriage had contractual force. It would seem that Joan had a suitor who, rejected, tried to revenge himself by haling her before the court of justice at Towel, which found against him, incidentally to the consternation of her father and mother, who would have preferred to see her wed.
What was the dream which your father said he had had about you before you had left his house?
When I was still in the house of my father and mother, I was several times told by my mother that my father had told her that he had dreamt that I, Joan, his daughter, would go away with some men-at-arms. And much care did my father and mother have about it, and they kept me close and in great subjection. And for my part I obeyed them in all things save only in that lawsuit I had in the city of Towel in the matter of marriage. And I have heard my mother say that my father told my brothers, truly, if I knew that must happen which I fear in the matter of my daughter, I had rather you drowned her. And if you did not do it, I would drown her myself. When I was 13 years old, I had a voice from God to help me govern my conduct. And the first time I was very fearful, and came this voice about the hour of noon, in the summer time, in my father's garden. I had not fasted on the eve preceding that day. I heard the voice on the right-hand side, towards the church, and rarely do I hear it without a brightness. This brightness comes from the same side as the voice is heard. It is usually a great light. When I came to France, often I heard this voice. The voice was sent to me by God, and after I had thrice heard this voice, I knew that it was the voice of an angel. This voice has always guarded me well, and I have always understood it clearly.
What sort of help, say you, that this voice has brought you for the salvation of your soul?
It has taught me to conduct myself well, to go habitually to church. It told me that I, Joan, should come into France. This voice told me twice or thrice a week that I, Joan, must go away and that I must come to France and that my father must know nothing of my leaving. The voice told me that I should go to France and I could not bear to stay where I was. The voice told me that I should raise the siege laid to the city of Orleans. The voice told me also that I should make my way to Robert de Baudricourt in the fortress of Vaucouleurs, the captain of that place, that he would give me people to go with me. And me, I answered it that I was a poor girl who knew not how to ride nor lead in war.
Have you some other sign that these voices are good spirits?
St. Michael assured me of it before the voices came.
How did you know it was Saint Michael?
I knew it by his speech and by the language of the angels, and I believe firmly that they were angels.
How did you know that they were angels?
I believed it quite quickly, and I had the will to believe it. St. Michael, when he came to me, told me that St. Catherine and St. Margaret would come to me, and that I should act by their advice, that they were bidden to lead me in what I had to do, and that I should believe in what they would say to me, and that it was by God's order.
If the devil put himself into the form or figure of a good angel, how would you know that it is a good or bad angel?
I should certainly know if it was St. Michael or some other thing which had put itself into his resemblance. The first time I had great doubt if it was St. Michael who came to me, and that first time I was very much afraid, and I saw him afterwards several times before knowing that it was St. Michael.
How was it that you recognized Saint Michael rather on that occasion when you did believe it to be him, than the first time he appeared to you?
The first time I was a child and was afraid, and afterwards St. Michael taught me and showed me, and proved to me that I must believe firmly that it was him.
What doctrines did he teach you?
Before all things, he told me to be a good child and that God would help me. And, among other things, he told me to come to the help of the King of France, and the angel told me the pitiful state that was in the kingdom of France.
Of these visions which you say you had, did you mention them to your parish priest or to any other churchman?
No, but to Robert de Baudricourt only, and to my king. My voices did not oblige me to hold this secret, but I feared greatly to reveal it for fear of the Burgundians, lest they prevent my journey. And above all, I greatly feared my father, that he might prevent me from making my journey.
Did you think you were doing well in going away without the permission of your father and your mother, since we must honor our father and our mother?
In all other things I did obey my father and my mother, save in this leaving them, but afterwards I wrote to them about it, and they gave me their forgiveness.
When you left your father and your mother, did you think you were committing a sin?
Since God commanded it, it had to be. Since God commanded it, had I had 100 fathers and 100 mothers, had I been a king's daughter, I should have departed.
Did you ask your voices whether you could tell your father and your mother of your setting forth?
As for my father and my mother, my voices would have been satisfied that I tell them, had it not been for the pain it would have caused them if I had announced my departure. As for me, I would not have told them for anything in the world. The voices left it to me to tell my father and my mother, or to keep silent. And them within so little of going out of their senses the time I left to go to the town of Vaucouleurs.
How did Joan set about leaving Domremy without alerting her parents?
I went to my uncle's and I told him that I wanted to stay with him for a time, and there I stayed about 8 days. And I then told my uncle that I must go to the town of Vaucouleurs, and my uncle took me there. And when I came to this town of Vaucouleurs, I recognized Robert de Baudricourt, whereas never before had I seen him, and by my voice I knew this Robert, for the voice told me that it was him. And I told this same Robert that I must go into France. This Robert twice refused and repulsed me.
Durand Laxart, I went myself to fetch Joan at her father's house, and I took her to my house. And she told me that she wanted to go to France to the Dauphin to have him crowned, saying, "Has it not been said that France will be lost by a woman, and shall thereafter be restored by a virgin?" And she told me also that I was to go to Robert de Baudricourt, that he might have her taken to the place where the Lord Dauphin was to be found. This Robert several times told me that I should return her to her father's house after having cuffed her soundly.
Robert twice refused and repulsed me, and the third time he received me and gave me men. The voice had told me that it would so happen.
Durand Laxart, when the maid saw that Robert did not want to send her to the place where the Dauphin was, she herself handed me my cloak and told me that she wished to withdraw. And withdrawing, I took her to St. Nicholas, and when she was there she went with a safe conduct to the Lord Charles, Duke of Lorraine, and when the Lord Charles saw her, he spoke with her and gave her 4 francs, which she showed me. Then Joan went back to Vaucouleurs, and the inhabitants of the town of Vaucouleurs bought for her men's clothes, hose, leggings, and all that she needed. And myself and Jacques Alain of Vaucouleurs bought her a horse for the price of 12 francs at our own expense. However, thereafter the Lord Robert de Baudricourt caused us to be reimbursed. And that done, Jean de Metz, Bertrand de Pouligny, Colette de Vienne, and Richard Larcher, with the 2 servants of Jean de Metz and Bertrand, took Joan to the place where the Dauphin was.
The Duke of Lorraine required that I be taken to him. I went and I told him that I wanted to go to France, and the Duke questioned me about the restoration of his health, and I told him that of that I knew nothing. I said little to him about my journey, but I said to the Duke that he should give me his son and some men to take me into France, and that I would pray to God for his health. I went to him by means of a safe conduct, and I returned afterwards to the town of Vaucouleurs. I was in man's clothes, holding in my hand a sword which Robert de Baudricourt had given me, and without other arms, with a knight, an esquire, and 4 servants. I came to the town of St. Urbain, and there I spent the. Robert de Baudricourt caused those who escorted me to swear that they would lead me truly and surely, and Robert said to me, "Go, as I set off, go and let what is to be come to pass." On the way I passed the town of Auxerre, and there I heard mass in the great church. Often at that time I had my voices.
Bertrand de Pouligny, upon leaving the town on the first day we were afraid because of the Burgundian and English soldiers who were masters of the roads, and we made our way during the night. Joan the maid said to me, as to Jean de Metz and those who travelled with us, that it would be a good thing to hear mass, but because of the wars in the countryside we could not, for we had to pass unperceived. Every night she lay down with Jean de Metz and me, keeping upon her surcoat and hose tied and tight. I was young then, and yet I had neither desire nor carnal movement to touch woman, and I should not have dared to ask such a thing of Joan, because of the abundance of goodness which I saw in her. We were 11 days on the road going to the king, then Dauphin, but on the way we had many anxieties, but Joan repeatedly told us not to be afraid, and that once we came to the town of Chinon, the noble Dauphin would give us good countenance. She never swore, and I myself was much stimulated by her voices, for it seemed to me that she was sent by God, and I never saw in her any evil, but always was she so virtuous a girl that she seemed a saint. And thus altogether, without great difficulties, we made our way to the place of Chinon where the king, then Dauphin, lay. Jean de Novelonpont or de Metz, leaving the town of Vaucouleurs, for fear of the English and the Burgundians who were everywhere across our road to the king, we sometimes moved at night. And we kept on the road for a period of 11 days, riding towards the town of Chinon, and making my way beside her, I asked her if she would do what she said, and the maid always told us to have no fear, and that she had a mandate to do this thing, that she must go to the war to recover the kingdom of France. On our way, Bertrand and we lay down with her, and the maid lay beside me, keeping on her doublet and hose, and I respected her so that I would never have dared make advances to her, and I say upon oath that neither did I have for her desire nor carnal motion. On her way she would have liked to hear mass, for she often said to us, if we could hear mass we should do well, but to my knowledge we only heard mass twice upon our way. I had great confidence in the maid's sayings, and I was fired by her sayings, and with love for her, divine as I believe. I believe that she was sent by God, Never did she swear she liked to hear mass, and she crossed herself with the sign of the cross. And thus we took her to the king to the place of Chinon, as secretly as we could. The said Joan then says that she reached him whom she calls her king without obstacle.
When I came to the town of Saint Catherine de Fierbois, then I wrote to my king. Then I went to the town of Château Chinon, where my king is. I reached there at about noon and took lodging at an inn. And after a meal I went to my king, who was in the castle. When I entered my king's room, I knew him among the others by the counsel of my voice, which revealed him to me. I told my king that I wanted to go and make war against the English.
When the voice showed you him you call the king, was there any light in that place?
Pass that question.
Did you see an angel over your king?
Spare me that and pass the question. Before my king put me to work, he himself had had many apparitions and some beautiful revelations.
What revelations and apparitions did your king have?
I shall not tell you that, I shall not answer you, but send to my king and he will tell you. The voice had promised me that, as soon as I came to the king, he himself would receive me. Of my father, of my mother, and of all that I have done since I came to France I will willingly swear. But of the revelations which have been made to me by God's means, never have I said or revealed anything to anyone whatsoever, excepting it be to Charles only, my king, and I will not reveal them though it cost me my head. I have orders from my visions and my secret council to reveal them to nobody. I will willingly tell you whatsoever I have received permission from God to reveal. But as to that touching the revelations concerning the King of France, I will not tell it without the permission of my voices.
Was there an angel above the king's head when you saw him for the first time?
By Saint Mary, if there was I know nothing of it and did not see him.
Was there any light there?
There were present more than 300 knights and some 50 torches, not to mention the spiritual light. And rarely had I revelation, but there was light.
How came the king to have faith in what you said?
He himself had good countersigns and through the clergy.
What revelations did your king have?
You will not have that out of me this year. I was questioned for 3 weeks by the clergy of the towns of Chinon and of Poitiers. And the king had a sign of my matters before he would believe me, and the clerics of my party were of this opinion, that it seemed to them that in my matter was nothing but good.
Have you been to Saint Catherine de Fierbois?
Yes, there I heard 3 masses in one day, and thereafter I went to the town of Chinon. I sent letters to my king, in which it was contained that I sent them to know if I could enter the town where my king was, and that I had made my way 150 leagues to come to him and bring him succor, and that I knew many things to the good touching him, and I believe that in the same letters it was contained that I should know the king well from among all others.
Eyewitnesses of the scene at Chinon testified to what they remembered at the trial of rehabilitation. Raoul de Gaucourt, Grand Master of the King's household, 85 years of age or thereabouts. I was present in the castle and town of Chinon when the maid arrived, and I saw her when she presented herself before the royal majesty, with much humility and great simplicity, the poor little shepherdess, and I heard the following words which she spoke to the king. Very noble Lord Dauphin, I am come and am sent by God to bring succor to you and your kingdom. The king, having seen and heard her to be better informed of her matter, ordered that she be placed in the keeping of Guillaume Bellier, master of his house, bailiff of Troyes, and his lieutenant at Chinon, whose wife was a most devout woman and of most excellent good fame. Jean Chardier's Chronique. Then Joan, who was come before the king, made the bows and reverences customary to make to the king, as if she had been nurtured at court, and this greeting done said, addressing her speech to the king, God give you life, gentle king, whereas she knew him not and had never seen him, and there were present several lords, dressed with pomp and richly, and more so than was the king. Wherefore he answered the said Joan, Not I am the king, Joan, and pointing to one of his lords said, There is the king, to which she replied, By God, gentle prince, it is you and none other. The writer who gives us the interview in greatest detail was not an eyewitness of it, but was unquestionably well informed. This was Jean Pasquerel, a hermit of Saint Augustine, formerly of the monastery at Bayeux, and subsequently Joan's confessor.
The masters who examined you there, some over a month, others over 3 weeks, did they question you about the change in your apparel?
I do not remember.
Jean Dollon, the master's report having been made to the king, this maid was put into the hands of the Queen of Sicily, mother of the Queen our sovereign lady, and to certain ladies being with her, by whom this maid was seen, visited, and secretly. But after they had seen and looked at all there was to look at in this case, the lady said and related to the king that she and her ladies found with certainty that she was a true and entire maid in whom appeared no corruption or violence. After having heard these things, the king, considering the great goodness which was in this maid and what she had said to him, that by God was she sent to him, concluded in his council that henceforth he would use her aid for the war, given that to do so was she sent to him. It was therefore deliberated that she should be sent into the city of Orleans, which was then besieged by the English. For this were given to her people for the service of her person, and others to take her there. For the ward and conducting of her, I was ordered by the king, our lord. For the safety of her body, the Lord King had made for the maid harness armor proper to her body, and that done, ordered her a certain quantity of men at arms to lead and conduct her safely, she and those of her company, to the place of Orleans. Joan was taken first to Tours where, while the king was making an effort to raise a fresh army, her armor and banner were made. It was in Tours that Jean Pasquerel made her acquaintance. Joan had her standard made on which was painted the image of our Saviour seated in judgment in the clouds of the sky, and there was an angel painted holding in his hand a fleur-de-lis which the image was blessing. I was in Tours there where this standard was painted. When Joan left Tours to go to Orleans, she asked me not to leave her, but to remain always with her as her confessor, which I promised her to do. We were at Blois about 2 or 3 days, waiting for the victuals which were there being loaded into boats, and it was there that she bade me have made a banner to rally the priests, and on this banner to have painted the image of our Lord crucified, which I did. This banner completed, Joan twice a day, morning and evening, caused all the priests to assemble, and when they were met together, they sang anthems and hymns to Saint Mary, and Joan was with them, and she would not have the soldiers mingle with the priests if they had not confessed. And she exhorted all the soldiers to confess that they might come to this assembly, and at the assembly itself all the priests were ready to hear those who wished to confess. When Joan set out from Blois to go to Orleans, she caused all the priests to rally about this banner, and the priests marched ahead of the army. They went out by the Salone way thus assembled, singing the Veni Creator Spiritus and many other anthems, and camped that night in the fields and the same on the day following. Thus and again in Heman Raguer's accounts, we find for May 10, 1429 a payment, to the master armourer for a complete harness for the maid, £100 Tournois. In addition to the armour there was the sword itself, of which we know that she had caused it to be taken from the church of Saint Catherine at Fierbois.
When I was at Tours or at Chinon, I sent to seek a sword which was in the church of Saint Catherine of Fierbois, behind the altar, and it was found at once all covered with rust.
How did you know that this sword was there?
This sword was in the earth, all rusty, and there were upon it 5 crosses, and I knew it by my voices, and I had never seen the man who went to seek this sword. I wrote to the prelates of the place that if they please I should have the sword, and they sent it to me. It was not very deep underground behind the altar, as it seems to me, but I do not know exactly whether it was before or behind the altar. I think that I wrote at the time that it was behind the altar. After this sword had been found, the prelates of the place had it rubbed, and at once the rust fell from it without difficulty. There was an arms merchant of Tours who went to seek it, and the prelates of that place gave me a sheath, and those of Tours also with them had 2 sheaths made for me, one of red velvet and the other of cloth of gold, and I myself had another made of right strong leather. But when I was captured, it was not that sword which I had. I always wore that sword until I had withdrawn from Saint-Denis after the assault against Paris.
Had you, when you went to Orleans, a standard, and of what color?
I had a standard whose field was sown with fleurs de lis, and there was the world figured and 2 angels at the sides, and its color was white, of Beaucassin canvas. And there, it seems to me, were written the names of Jesus and of Mary, and they were.
Which did you like the better, your standard or your sword?
I liked better, even 40 times my standard than my sword.
Who caused you to have this painting on the standard done?
I have told you often enough that I did nothing but by God's commandment. I bore this standard when we went forward against the enemy to avoid killing anyone. I have never killed anyone.
Louis de Coutts, as far as I was in a position to know, Joan was a good and honest woman, living in Catholic fashion. She very readily heard Mass and never missed going to hear it if that was possible for her. She waxed very wrath when she heard the name of God blasphemed, or if she heard someone swear. Several times I heard when the Lord Duke of Alençon swore or spoke some blasphemy, that she reprimanded him, and in general nobody in the army dared, before her, swear or blaspheme for fear of being by her reprimanded. She would not have any women with the army. Once, near to the town of Châteaudière, having seen the mistress of one of the soldiers, a knight, she pursued her with drawn sword. She did not, however, strike the woman, but warned her gently and charitably that she be no longer found in the company of the soldiers, otherwise she would do something to her which would not please her. This testimony is confirmed by the Duke of Alençon himself. Joan was chaste, and she detested the women who follow soldiers. I saw her once at Saint Denis, returning from the king's coronation, pursue with drawn sword a girl who was with the soldiers, and in such manner that in chasing her she broke her sword. She became very incensed when she heard the soldiers swear, and scolded them much, and especially me who swore from time to time, so that when I saw her I refrained from my swearing. Sometimes in the army I lay down to sleep with Joan and the soldiers, all in the straw together, a la Pélade. And sometimes I saw Joan prepare for the night, and sometimes I looked at her breasts, which were beautiful, and yet I never had carnal desire for her.
Do you know Brother Richard?
I had never seen him when I arrived before Troyes.
How did Brother Richard receive you?
They of the town of Troyes, as I think, sent him to me, saying that they feared lest I be not a thing of God. And when he came towards me, as he approached he made signs of the cross and sprinkled holy water, and I said to him, Approach boldly, I shall not fly away.
The people of Troyes sent 2 letters to their neighbors of Rheims, in which they affirmed their willingness to remain loyal to the oath which they had taken to King Henry and to the Duke of Burgundy. They also let their fear of reprisals from the garrison appear between the lines. Whatsoever be our will, we the inhabitants, we must look to the men of war who are in the town, stronger than us. As for Joan's letter, it was cast into the fire and left unanswered. The bastard of Orleans, the place where the king made a halt with his army, was before the city of Troyes. Once there, he held counsel with the lords of his blood and the other captains of war to consider whether they should set themselves before the city and lay siege to it, or take it, or if it would be better to march past it, going directly to Rheims and leaving this city of Troyes. The king's council was divided between diverse opinions, and they wondered what was best to be done. Then the maid came and entered into the council, and spoke these words, or nearly.
Noble Dauphin, order that your people go and besiege the town of Troyes and stay no longer in council. For, in God's name, within 3 days I will take you into the city of Troyes by love or by force or by courage, and false Burgundy will stand amazed.
Then the maid crossed at once with the king's army, and left the encampment beside the moats, and made admirable dispositions such as could not have done better 2 or 3 of the most famous and experienced soldiers. And she worked so well that night that on the morrow the bishop and the citizens of the city made their obedience to the king, shaking and trembling. And subsequently it was learned that from the moment when she advised the king not to go away from the city, the inhabitants lost heart and did nothing but seek refuge and flee into the churches. This city being reduced to royal obedience, the king went away to Rheims, where he found total obedience, and he was there consecrated and crowned. This deposition is confirmed by that of Simon Charles, who was likewise present. At the moment when the king was before the town of Troyes, and while the soldiers saw that they had no more victuals and were discouraged and ready to withdraw, Joan told the king that he should doubt not, and that on the morrow he would have the town. Then she took her standard. Many foot soldiers followed her, to whom she gave order to make faggots to fill the moats. They made many of them, and on the morrow Joan cried the assault, signifying that they should put the faggots into the moats. Seeing this, the inhabitants of Troyes, fearing attack, sent to the king to negotiate a composition. And the king made composition with the inhabitants, and made his entry into Troyes in great pomp, Joan carrying her standard beside the king.
When you went up before the town of Paris, had you had a revelation from your voices to go there?
No, but I went there at the request of noblemen at arms, who wanted to make a skirmish or some valiance in arms against Paris, and I had every intention to go further and to cross the moats of the town of Paris.
Did you do anything without the command of your voices?
You are answered, read well your book and you will find it. It was at the request of the men of war that was made a valiance in arms against Paris, and also against La Charité at the request of my king. But it was neither against nor at the command of my voices.
Percival de Cagny, Thursday, day of Our Lady, 8th day of the month of September 1429, the Maid, the Duke of Alençon, the Marshals de Baussac and de Rise and other captains, and great numbers of men-at-arms and baggage-men, Homs de Trait, set out at about 8 in the forenoon from La Chapelle near Paris, in good order. Some to go into battle, the others to guard and supply those who would make the assault. The Maid, the Marshal de Rise, the Sire de Gaucourt, called by order of the Maid as seemed good to her, were given the task of the assault on the Saint-Honoré gate. The Maid took her standard in hand, and among the first entered the ditches, moat near to the pig market. The attack was hard and long, and it was a marvel to hear the noise and din of the cannon and culverins which those within fired at those without, and all manner of missiles in such great abundance as to be innumerable. And although the maid and great number of knights and esquires and other men of war had gone down into the ditches at the edge or thereabouts, very few were wounded, and there were many on foot or mounted who were struck and thrown to the ground by blows from cannon stones. The assault lasted from about the hour of noon to about the hour of nightfall, and after sunset the maid was struck by a crossbow bolt in the thigh. And since being struck forced herself to cry louder than ever that every man should approach the walls, and that the place would be taken. But because it was night and she was wounded, and that the men-at-arms were weary from the long assault which they had made, the Sire de Gaucourt and others went to fetch the maid, and against her will took her out of the moat, and so ended the attack. And she was very sorry indeed to leave in that way, saying, "By my Martin, the place would have been taken." They put her on a horse and took her to her billet in the place of La Chapelle near all the rest of the king's company, the Duke of Bar, the Count of Clermont, who that day were come from Saint-Denis.
What arms did you offer in the church of Saint-Denis in France?
A white harness entire for gentlemen at arms with a sword, which I won before the town of Paris.
Why did you offer these arms?
It was in devoutness, as is the custom among men of war when they are wounded. And because I had been wounded before the town of Paris, I gave them to Saint-Denis because that is the war cry of France.
Did you know or meet Catherine de la Rochelle?
Yes, at Jargeau or at Montfauconenberry.
Did Catherine show you a certain lady dressed in white, who she said sometimes appeared to her?
No.
What did Catherine say to you?
Catherine told me that there came to her a certain lady clad in cloth of gold, telling her that she should go to the good towns, and that the king would give her heralds and trumpets to make proclamation that all gold, all silver and all hidden treasure be at once brought to her, and that if those who had treasures hidden brought them not, she, Catherine, would know them well, and that she would know where to find these treasures, and that with them she would pay the men-at-arms in Joan's service. To this I answered this Catherine that she return to her husband, and do her housework and feed her children. And to have certainty in the matter of this Catherine, I spoke with Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret, and they told me that as for the matter of Catherine de la Rochelle, it was nothing but folly and nullity. And I wrote to my king telling him what he should do about it, and when I went to him I told him that it was folly and nullity, this matter of Catherine. However, Brother Richard wanted Catherine to be set to work, and they were very ill content with me, Brother Richard and this Catherine.
Did you not talk with Catherine de la Rochelle in the matter of going to La Charité-sur-Loire?
Catherine did not advise me to go there, and said that it was too cold, and that I should not go. I told her, when she wanted to go to the Duke of Burgundy to make peace, that it seemed to me we should find no peace but at the lance point. And I asked Catherine whether this white lady who appeared to her came to her every night, telling her that I should like to sleep with her in her bed to see her. And in fact, I lay down and watched until about midnight, and I saw nothing, and then I fell asleep. And when morning came, I asked this Catherine whether the white lady had come to her. She answered me yes, while I slept, and that she had been unable to awaken me. And I asked her if this lady would come the following night, and this Catherine answered me yes. Therefore that day I slept in the daytime to be able to watch all the following night, and I lay down that night with Catherine, and I watched all night long. But I saw nothing, although often I questioned Catherine to know if the lady was going to come or not. And Catherine answered me, yes, presently.
What did you do on the moats of the town of La Charité?
I had an assault made there.
Why did you not enter into the town of La Charité, since you had God's commandment to do so?
Who told you that I had God's commandment?
Did you have counsel from your voices?
Me, I wanted to go into France, but the men of war said that it was better to go first before the town of La Charité.
What age had the child which you held at the baptismal font?
The child was 3 days old, and it was carried before the image of Our Lady of Lagny. The maidens of the town were before the image and me. I wanted to go and pray to God and Our Lady that life be given to the child. I went there with the other maidens, and I prayed, and at last life appeared in this child, who yawned 3 times and was immediately baptized. It died thereafter and was buried in holy ground. 3 days had passed, so they said, during which no life had appeared in this child. It was as black as my coat, but when it yawned, color began returning to it. I was with the maidens, praying on my knees before Our Lady.
Is it not mortal sin to receive a man to be ransomed, and once he is a prisoner, to bring about his death?
I did not do that.
Was there not the matter of one Franquet de Raz, whom you had killed as an enemy?
I consented that he be put to death if he had deserved it, because he had admitted to being murderer, thief, and traitor. His trial lasted 15 days, and the judge was the bailiff of Senlis, and the justiciars of Lagny. I had asked to have this Franque to have in exchange a man of Paris, master of the Hotel de Ellers. And when I heard that this man was dead, and when the bailiff told me that I was doing justice a great injury in liberating this Franque, then I said to the bailiff, since that man is dead whom I wanted to have, do with this one what injustice you must do. In Easter week last, being upon the moat at Melun, it was told me by the voices of Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret that I should be taken before Saint John's day, and that so it must be, and that I be not dismayed, and take all in good part, and that God would help me. Since I received revelation at Melun that I should be taken, I submitted myself above all in the matter of war to the will of the captains. Meanwhile, however, I did not tell them that I had had revelation that I should be taken.
When you went for the last time to Campigny, from what place did you set out?
From Crépy and Valois.
Did you remain some days in Campigny before making any sortie or sally?
I came in the morning at a secret hour and entered into the town without the enemy knowing much about it, as I believe, and the same day towards eventide I made that sally in which I was taken.
If the voices had ordered you to go out of Campigny while signifying that you would be taken, would you have gone?
If I had known the hour and that I must be taken, I should not have gone willingly. Nevertheless, I should have done their commandment in the end, whatever was to happen to me.
When you went out of Campigny, did you have voice or revelation to go and to make that sortie?
That day I did not know that I should be taken and did not have precept to go out, but still it had been told me that I must be made prisoner.
When you made that sortie, did you cross by the bridge of Campigny?
I crossed by the bridge and the boulevard, and went with company of my men against the men of the Lord John of Luxembourg, and twice drove them back to the Burgundians' camp. And then the English who were there cut the road behind me and my men. And me, in retreating, I was caught in the fields on the Picardy side, near the boulevard, and was the river between Campigny and the place where I was taken.
Percival de Cagny gives some details of this capture. The year 1430, the 23rd day of the month of May, the maid being at the place of Crépy, heard that the Duke of Burgundy with great number of men at arms and others, and the Earl of Arundel were come to besiege the town of Campigny. At about midnight she left Crépy in company with about 300 or 400 soldiers, and although her people told her that she had but few men to pass through the army of the Burgundians and the English, she said, "By my Martin, we are enough. I shall go and see my good friends of Campigny." She arrived at that place at about sunrise, and without loss or damage to herself or her men entered into the town. And about 9 o'clock in the morning, the maid heard say that there was great and strong skirmishing on the meadows before the town. She put on her armor and ordered her men to arms and horse, and went out to join in the mêlée. As soon as she came, the enemy fell back and was put to flight. The maid charged hard against the Burgundian side. They of the ambush warned their people, who fell back in great disorder. Then they uncovered their ambush, and spurring hard they went and placed themselves between the bridge into the town, and the maid and her company, and some of them turned straight upon the maid in such great number that not well could they of her company hold them back, and they said to the maid, "Take pains to do your best to get back to the town, or you and we are lost." When the maid heard them speak thus, very angry, she said to them, "Be silent, their discomfiture depends on you, think only of striking hard at them." Whatever she might say, her men would not believe her, and by force made her return directly to the bridge. And when the Burgundians and the English saw that she was coming back to get into the town, with a great effort they gained the end of the bridge. The captain of the place, seeing the great multitude of Burgundians and English about to enter upon the bridge, for the fear he had lest he lose the town, had the bridge into the town raised and the gates closed, and thus remained the maid shut out and few of her men with her. Philippe the Good hastened to make his capture of Joan widely known. Of the letters which were written to that end, we still have the one sent to the burgesses of Saint Quentin. It is dated on the same day as the capture, May 23, 1430, and at Caudon near Campigny. The Duke writes thus, "Very dear and well-beloved, knowing that you desire to have news of us, we signify to you that this day, 23rd of May, at about 6 hours afternoon, the adversaries of my lord the King of England and ourselves, who had come together in very great force and had thrown themselves into the town of Campigny, before which we and the men of our army are camped, came out of the town against the camp of our vanguard nearest to them. In this sortie was she whom they call the Maid, with several of their principal captains, in the encounter with whom our cousin, Messer John of Luxembourg, who was present, and others of our people, and some men of my lord the king, whom he had sent to pass on and go to Paris, made very great and bitter resistance, and presently we arrived there in person, and found that the adversaries had been repulsed already. And by the pleasure of our blessed Creator the thing thus came about, and such mercy was vouchsafed us that she who is called the Maid was taken, and with her many captains, knights and esquires and others taken, drowned or dead, of whom at this time we know not yet the names. The journal Dun Bourgeois de Paris, which notes, the 23 May, Dame Joan, the maid of the Armagnacs, was taken before Campigny by Messer John of Luxembourg, his men, and 1,000 English on their way to Paris. 400 at least of the maid's men were killed or drowned.
How did you think to escape from the castle of Beaulieu between two pieces of wood?
I have never been a prisoner in any place, but I would try to escape from it. Being in that castle, I had shut up my keepers in the tower, excepting the porter who saw me and encountered me. It seems to me that it did not please God that I should escape that time, and that I must see the King of the English, as my voices had told me.
Were you long in the tower of Beaurevoir?
I was there for 4 months or thereabouts. When I heard that the English were coming to take me, I was very wroth at it, and however my voices forbade me often to leap from that tower. And at last, for fear of the English, I leapt and commended myself to God and the Virgin Mary, and I was injured in that leap. And after I had leapt, the voice of St. Catherine told me that I should be of good countenance, and that they of Campigny would receive succor.
What was the cause for which you leapt from the tower of Beaurevoir?
I had heard say that all they of Campigny down to the age of 7 years were to be put to fire and to blood, and I preferred to die rather than live after such destruction of good people, and that was one of the causes of my leaping. And the other was that I knew that I was sold to the English, and I would rather have died than to be in the hands of the English, my adversaries.
Did you make that leap on the advice of your voices?
Catherine told me almost every day that I must not leap, and that God would help me and also them of Campigny. And I said to St. Catherine that since God would help them of Campigny, I myself would like to be there. Then St. Catherine said to me, "Without fail, you must accept your lot, and you will not be delivered until you have seen the King of the English." And I answered her, "Truly, I would rather not see him, and I would rather die than be put into the hands of the English."
Did you say to St. Catherine and St. Margaret these words, "Will God let the good people of Campigny die in so wicked a way?"
I did not say the word si mauvaisement, but I said, "How can God let the good people of Campigny die, who have been so faithful to their Lord?" After I had fallen from the tower I was, during 2 or 3 days, without will to eat. And I was so hurt in that leap that I could neither eat nor drink. And meanwhile I had comfort from St. Catherine, who told me that I should confess and ask forgiveness of God for having leapt, and that without fail the people of Campigny would have succor before the feast of St. Martin of the winter. Then I began to return to health, and I began to eat, and soon I was cured.
When you leapt, did you think to kill yourself?
No, in leaping I commended myself to God, and I thought in making that leap to escape so that I should not be delivered over to the English.
Haymon de Macy, who was in John of Luxembourg's service. I saw Joan for the first time when she was shut up in the castle of Beaurevoir for the Lord Count of Ligny, John of Luxembourg. I saw her several times in prison, and on several occasions conversed with her. I tried several times playfully to touch her breasts, trying to put my hand on her chest, the which Joan would not suffer but repulsed me with all her strength. Joan was taken to the castle of Crodoy, where was held prisoner a man altogether notable, called Master Nicholas de Queuville, Chancellor of the Church of Amiens, doctor of both civil and canon law, who often celebrated Mass in the prison, and Joan, the most often, heard his Mass. I later heard this Master Nicholas say that he had heard Joan's confession and that she was a good Christian and very pious. He spoke much good of Joan.
Were you required at Beaurevoir to wear women's clothes?
Yes, truly, and I answered that I would not change clothes without the permission of our Lord. The Demoiselle of Luxembourg and the Lady of Beaurevoir offered me a woman's dress or the stuff to make one, asking me to wear that habit, and I answered that I had not permission from God, and that it was not yet time. Had it been that I was to wear women's clothes, I should have done so more willingly at the request of those women than of any other woman in all France excepting my queen.
Bishop of Beauvais offered, on behalf of the King of England, a sum of 6,000 francs to those who had captured Joan, and to the bastard of Vendôme a pension of between 300 and 400 livres. For her actual ransom, the sum of 10,000 francs was offered. Joan's last long journey was to take her from the castle of Beaurevoir to Rouen, where she was to stand trial for heresy. The proceedings which ended in Joan's conviction were to last 5 months, from January 9 to May 30, 1431, and were in 3 phases. The better to recreate the atmosphere of this trial, we give below the complete text of one day's interrogatories, that of Saturday, March 17th, 1431.
In what form, size, appearance, and clothing does St. Michael come to you?
He was in the form of a true and honest man, and as for the clothes and other things, I shall not tell you any more. As for the angels, I saw them with my own eyes, and you will get no more out of me about that. I believe as firmly the doings and sayings of St. Michael, who appeared to me as I believe that our Lord Jesus Christ suffered death and passion for us. And what moves me to believe this is the good advice, the good comfort, and the good doctrine that he did and gave me.
Will you leave to the determination of our Holy Mother, the Church, all your matters whether in good or in evil?
As for the Church, I love her, and would wish to sustain her with all my power for our Christian faith. And it is not I who should be prevented from going to church and hearing Mass. As for the good works which I have done, and at my coming, I must put my faith in the King of Heaven, who sent me to Charles, son of Charles, King of France, who is King of France. And you will see that the French will soon win a great thing which God will send to these French, such that it will rock the whole kingdom of France. I say it that, when it happens, you may remember that I said it.
After how long will this happen?
In our Lord's own time.
Will you abide by the Church's determination for your sayings and deeds?
I abide by God who sent me, by the Holy Virgin and all the saints in paradise. And I am of opinion that it is all one and the same thing, God and the Church, and that of that one should make no difficulty. Why do you make difficulty over that?
There is a Church triumphant where are God, the saints, the angels and souls already saved. And there is the Church militant in which are the Pope, God's vicar on earth, the cardinals and prelates of the Church, the clergy, and all good Christians and Catholics. This well-composed Church cannot err, and is ruled by the Holy Spirit. That is why I ask you whether you are willing to abide by the Church militant, that is to say, the one which is on earth, as I have explained to you.
I went to the King of France from God and the Virgin Mary, and all the saints in paradise, and the Church victorious above and by their commandment. And to that Church I submit all my good deeds and all that I have done and shall do. As for submitting myself to the Church militant, I shall answer you nothing else for the time being.
What say you of that woman's clothing, which is offered you that you may go and hear Mass?
As for women's clothing, I shall not put it on until it please God. And if it should be that I must be brought even to judgment, I trust in the Lords of the Church that they will grant me the mercy of having a woman's shift and a covering for my head. And I would rather die than revoke what God has made me do. For I believe firmly that God will not let it happen that I be brought so low without I have immediate succor, and by miracle.
Since you say that you wear a man's habit by God's commandment, why do you ask for a woman's shift when it comes to dying?
It will suffice if it be long.
Your godmother, who has seen the fairy ladies, is she reputed a well-conducted woman?
I hold and repute her a respectable woman, and not a diviner or witch.
Since you have said that you would wear woman's clothes if you were allowed to go away, would that please God?
If permission were given me to withdraw in woman's clothes, immediately, thereafter, I should dress myself in man's clothes and do what is commanded me by God. And I have answered elsewhere that not for anything whatsoever would I take oath not to put on armor, and not to wear man's clothes to do the Lord's commandment.
What ages and what garments are worn by Saints Catherine and Margaret?
To that you shall have the answer you have already had from me, and none other. I have answered as most certainly as I know.
Did you believe before today that the fairy ladies were evil spirits?
I know nothing about that.
Do you know whether Saints Catherine and Margaret hate the English?
They love that which God loves and hate that which God hates.
Does God hate the English?
Of the love or hate which God has for the English, and of what he does to their souls, I know nothing. But well I know that they will be driven out of France, excepting those who will die there, and that God will send victory to the French over the English.
Was God for the English when their cause was prospering in France?
I know not if God hated the French, but I believe that it was his will to let them be stricken for their sins, if there were sins among them.
What guarantee and what succor do you expect from God for your wearing of man's clothes?
For the clothes as for the other things I have done, I expect no other recompense than the salvation of my soul.
What arms did you offer up in the church of Saint Denis of Paris?
I gave a white harness entire such as is fitting for a man of arms, with a sword which I won before the town of Paris.
With what object did you give these arms?
It was done in devoutness, as is the custom among men of arms when they are wounded. And because I had been wounded before the town of Paris, I offered them up to Saint Denis, because that is the war cry of France.
Did you do so that the arms might be worshipped?
No,
What was the purpose of the 5 crosses which were on the sword which you found at Saint Catherine of Fierbois?
I do not know.
Who was it led you to have painted on your standard angels with arms, feet, legs, and clothes?
You have been answered.
Did you have the angels painted, such as they come to you?
I had them painted in the manner that they are painted in churches.
Have you seen them like to the manner in which they were painted?
I shall not tell you anything else about that.
Why did you not have painted there that light which comes to you with the angel or with the voices?
I was not commanded to do so.
Did the 2 angels painted on your standard represent Saint Michael and Saint Gabriel?
They were there only to honor God who was painted on the standard. I had that representation of 2 angels made only to do honor to God who was figured there holding the world.
Those 2 angels figured on your standard. Were they the 2 angels guarding the world? Why were there not more of them there, since it had been commanded you by God to take this standard?
The whole standard was made at God's commandment by the voices of Saints Catherine and Margaret, who said to me, "Take up the standard in the name of the King of Heaven." And because they said to me, "Take up the standard in the name of the King of Heaven," I had made that figure of God and of the angels and in colors, and I did all by God's commandment.
Did you then ask those 2 saints if, by virtue of that standard, you would win all the wars in which you would be, and whether you would be victorious?
They told me to take it up boldly, and that God would help me.
Is it you who helped the standard, or the standard which helped you, or the contrary?
My victory or the standards, it was all in our Lord.
Was the hope of being victorious founded on the standard or on yourself?
It was founded in our Lord and not elsewhere.
If someone else had borne that standard, would it have brought as good fortune as when you had it?
I do not know. God knows, and I abide by him.
If someone on your side had given you his standard to bear, would you have carried it? And would you have had in that one likewise as good hope as in your own standard, which was given you in God's name, in particular the standard of your king, had you had it?
I carried with a better will that which had been ordered me to carry by God, and yet in all I trust in God.
What was the purpose of that sign which you put on your letters and those names? Jesus Maria.
The clerks who wrote my letters put it, and they said that it was fitting to put those 2 names, Jesus Maria.
Was it revealed to you that if you lost your virginity, you would lose your good fortune, and that your voices would come to you no more?
That was not revealed to me.
Do you believe that if you were married, the voices would come to you?
I do not know, and I trust in God.
Do you think and firmly believe that your king did well to kill the Lord Duke of Burgundy?
That was a great pity for the kingdom of France, and whatever may have happened between those 2 princes, God sent me to succor the King of France.
Since you have told us, and also the bishop, that you would answer to us and our delegates as freely as you would do to our most holy father the Pope, and that nevertheless there are many questions to which you will not reply, would you answer them more fully before the Pope than you do before us?
I have answered all as truly as I could, and if I knew that in anything which I remember I have not spoken, I would willingly speak.
Does it seem to you that you would be bound to answer, speaking the truth more fully, to our Lord Pope, Vicar of God, of all that he might ask you touching the faith and the matter of your conscience, than you do to us?
I demand to be taken before our Lord the Pope, and then I will answer before him all that I ought to answer.
Of what material was one of your rings on which were written these names? Jesus Maria.
I am not sure, and if it was gold, it was not pure gold, and I know not whether it was of gold or base metal. And I think that there were on it 3 crosses and no other sign as far as I know, excepting Jesus Maria.
Why did you like to look at that ring when you were going to do some warlike deed?
That was for my pleasure and in honor of my father and mother. And I, having that ring in my hand and on my finger, I touched Saint Catherine, who appeared to me visibly.
In what part of this saint, Catherine, did you touch her?
You will have nothing else on that.
Did you kiss or embrace saints, Catherine and Margaret?
I embraced both of them.
Had they a pleasant odor?
It is good to know that they had a pleasant odor.
When embracing them, did you feel any warmth or any other thing?
I could not embrace them without feeling and touching them.
In what part did you embrace them, the upper part or the lower?
It is more fitting to embrace them by the lower part than the higher.
Did you give these saints any garlands or chaplets?
In honor of them, I many times put such garlands on their images or representations in churches, and as to them who appeared to me, I never gave them any that I remember.
When you put garlands of that kind on the tree of which there was some talk before, did you put them in honor of them who appeared to you?
No,
When these saints came to you, did you make them a reverence by bending the knee and bowing?
yes, and as much as I could I made them my reverence, for I know well that they are of those who are of the kingdom of paradise.
No, you ought of those who go wandering with the fairies.
I have never been there, and I know nothing else about it. But I have indeed heard it said that they went on Thursdays. But in that I do not believe, and I believe that there is nothing in it unless it be witchcraft.
Did someone make the other standards float around the king's head when he was consecrated at Rheims?
Not as far as I know.
Why was your standard more carried in the church of Rheims at the king's consecration than the standard of the other captains?
That standard had borne the heat and burden. It was but right that it have the honors.
Wednesday, February 21st. It was at this first session that Koshan adjured her to swear to tell the truth, and that Joan avoided the oath, saying that there were certain matters touching which she would not swear. She agreed to take the oath concerning anything to do with her father, mother, place of birth, and incidents of her childhood, but not in the matter of her revelations.
Swear to speak the truth with your hand on the holy evangels in all matters on which you will be questioned.
I do not know on what you will question me. It may happen that you will ask me a thing which I shall not tell you.
You will swear to speak the truth on what will be asked you concerning matters of faith, and what you will know.
Of my father, of my mother, of all that I have done since I arrived in France, I will willingly swear. But the revelations made to me by God, I have not told nor revealed to anybody excepting only to Charles, my king, and I shall not reveal them though it cost me my head. I have had that by my visions and by my secret counsel to reveal them to nobody. In the next 8 days I shall know well whether I am to reveal them.
Swear to tell the truth in everything touching our faith.
It was at this point, as we have said above, that Joan took the oath while maintaining that reservation in the matter of her revelations. She then complained about being kept in irons, to which Koshan replied that it was to prevent an escape and to guard her more securely, that orders had been given to keep her in irons.
It is true that formerly I tried to escape from prison, as it is licit for any prisoner to do. Even if I could escape, I could not be reproached with having falsified or violated my word, for I have never given it to anybody.
At this the bishop made her 3 jailers, John Gray, John Bernard, and William Talbot, swear to guard her safely and in secret, that is to let nobody come near her. Which oath they took with their hands on a prayer book. Another argument with the Bishop of Beauvais interrupted this session of questioning, in which Joan showed her mettle, proving that she was quite able to confound more than one kind of adversary.
Recite Pater Noster and Ave Maria.
I will say them willingly provided you hear my confession.
Koshan dodged this request for, had he granted it, as a priest it would have put him in a very awkward situation. If he heard Joan's confession he would, thereafter, be prevented on his soul and conscience from declaring her guilty. On the other hand, to refuse to hear her confession was to avoid doing his sacerdotal duty. The minutes of the trial mention that the bishop was obliged to admonish her several times, and that in the end he attempted a compromise solution.
Willingly will we order appointed for you 1 or 2 notable men who speak French to whom you can say Pater Noster.
I shall not say it to them if they will not hear me in confession.
They were forced to drop the point and pass to the next subject. Thursday, February 22nd. Master Jean Beauper was appointed to undertake the questioning. His questions dealt chiefly with Joan's voices and with an account of the events which occurred at Vaucouleurs. This was after Koshan had tried in vain to get the accused to take a more complete oath than she had taken the day before.
Are you going to speak the truth?
You may well ask me something concerning which I will answer you the truth, and to another I shall not answer. If you were well informed about me, you ought to wish that I were out of your hands. I have done nothing excepting by revelation.
Saturday, February 24th. On this day Koshan again tried to get from her an oath free from reservations. 3 times he required this of her. These were her answers.
By my faith, you might ask me a thing that I would not tell you. It may happen that on many things which you might ask me, I would not tell you the truth touching my revelations, for perhaps you would force me to say a thing which I have sworn not to tell, and thus would I be forsworn, which you ought not to wish. And me, I tell you, consider well ere you call yourself my judge, for you are assuming a great charge, and you charge me too heavily. I have twice sworn in judgment, and that is enough.
Questions and answers followed in the matter of this oath, which Joan would not take.
I will willingly tell anything I shall know, but not all. I am come by God's will and have nothing to do here, and demand that I be sent back to God from whom I am come.
On that day more than half the session was given up to this question of the oath, Joan remaining unshakable. After that Beauper questioned her, notably about her voices.
Since what time have you neither eaten nor drunk?
Since yesterday afternoon.
Since when have you heard your voice?
I heard it yesterday and today.
At what time did you hear it?
I heard it 3 times, one in the morning, one at the hour of vespers, and the third time when they were ringing the evening Ave Maria. And still have I heard it more often than I say.
What were you doing yesterday morning when the voice came to you?
I slept and the voice awoke me.
Did the voice wake you by touching your arm?
I was awoken by the voice without touch.
The voice, was it in your chamber?
Not that I know, but it was in the castle.
Did you thank this voice, and do you go down on your knees?
I thanked it by rising and by sitting down on my bed, and I clasped my hands, and after that I asked it to come to my aid. The voice told me to answer Boldel. Turning towards the bishop, you say that you are my judge. Consider well what you are about, for in truth I am sent from God, and you are putting yourself in great danger.
Has this voice sometimes changed its mind?
Never have I found it of 2 contrary minds.
This voice which you say appears to you, is it an angel or does it come immediately, i.e., directly from God, or is it the voice of some saint?
This voice comes from God, and I think I shall tell you not fully what I know. And I have a greater fear of being at fault by saying something which displeases these voices than I have of not answering you.
Do you believe that it displeases God that the truth be told?
The voices have told me that I should say a thing to the king and not to you. This very night it has said to me many things for the good of my king, that I would my king might now know, though I had to drink no wine until Easter, for he would be the...
Could you not so manage things with this voice that it would obey you and carry a message to your king?
I know not if the voice would obey, unless it be the will of God and that God consented to it. Were it not by God's grace, I could do nothing.
This voice of which you ask counsel, has it face and eyes?
You shall not have that either. Little children say that sometimes men are hanged for having spoken the truth.
Do you know if you are in God's grace?
If I am not, may God bring me to it. If I am, may God keep me in it. I should be the most grieved woman in all the world if I knew myself to be not in the grace of God, and were I in sin, I think that the voice would not come to me, and I would that all could hear it as well as I.
Will you wear woman's clothes?
Give me a suit, I will take it and go away. Otherwise I will not take it. I am satisfied with what I have on, since it pleases God that I wear it.
Tuesday, February 27th. The questioning was again left to Jean Beauper, and after the usual argument about the oath, he again questioned her about the voices and on certain other details such as her sword.
Do you see Saint Michael and the angels corporeally and really?
I see them with my corporeal eyes as well as I see you, and when they withdrew from me I wept, and I should have liked them to take me with them.
Is it Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret with whom you speak?
I have told you often enough that they are Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret, and believe me if you will.
Is it forbidden you to say so?
I have not yet fully understood whether it is forbidden or not.
How do you know how to make the distinction when you answer on certain points and others not?
On certain points I asked permission and received it. I would rather be torn apart by 4 horses than to have gone to France without God's permission.
Did he command you to wear man's clothes?
The clothes are a trifle, the very least of things. I did not put on man's clothes by the counsel of any man in the world, and I did not put on the clothes, and I did not do anything excepting by the commandment of God and the angels.
Do you believe that you did right to put on man's clothes?
All that I have done by God's commandment, and I believe that I did right, and I expect from it good warrant and good succor.
In the particular case of taking on man's clothes, do you think that you did right?
Of what I have done in the world, I have done nothing but by God's commandment.
When you see this voice which comes to you, is there light?
There is much light everywhere, and that is very fitting. Not all light comes only for you.
Have you ever made a prayer that this sword be right fortunate?
It is good to know that I should have liked that my harness be right fortunate.
Had you your sword when you were taken prisoner?
No, but I had a sword that had been taken from a Burgundian.
Where has the sword been left? In which town?
I gave a sword to Saint Denis and a suit of armor, but it was not that sword. I had that sword at Lagny, and from Lagny I carried the sword of the Burgundian to Campigny. It was a good war sword, and good for giving good buffets and good swipes.
Which did you like the better, your standard or your sword?
I liked much better, even 40 times, my standard than my sword.
Who made you have a painting done on the standard?
I have told you often enough that I have done nothing without God's commandment.
Thursday, March 1st. On this day an attempt was made to confuse Joan by recalling a certain letter from the Count of Armagnac asking her which pope he ought to obey. While first 2 and finally 3 popes wrangled over the pontifical office, until the election of Martin V put an end to the strife, although not everybody was willing to accept his supremacy without hesitation.
To what he asked me, whom God would have him, the Count of Armagnac, obey, I answered him that I did not know, but I sent word to him of several things which were not put in writing. And as for my own part, I believe in the Lord Pope who is in Rome.
Is it your custom to put on your letters the names Jesus Maria with a cross?
On some I put them, and sometimes not. And sometimes I put a cross as a sign that he of my side to whom I was writing should not do what I wrote to him.
This cross, then, which Joan drew on such letters which she dictated as contained false information or orders designed to deceive the enemy, was simply a war ruse.
Before 7 years be past, the English will lose a greater gauge than they had at Orleans, and they will lose all in France. And the English will even suffer a greater loss than they ever had in France, and this will be by a great victory which God will send to the French.
How do you know that?
I know it well by a revelation which has been made to me, and it will happen before 7 years. And I should be very vexed should it be so long deferred. I know it as well as I know that you are there in front of me.
When will this happen?
I know not the day nor the hour.
In what year will it happen?
That too you shall not have, but I would that it might be before St. John's Day. I have said that before the feast of St. Martin of the Winter, we shall see many things, and it may well be that there will be Englishmen stricken to the ground.
Touching these words, which were noted down and registered in the month of March 1431, it is worth recalling that the liberation of Paris occurred on April 13, 1436. It was Cauchon himself who conducted the interrogation on that day. One wonders whether it was this which stimulated Joan in her vein of insolence, for she rarely carried defiance and irony to such lengths. Thus, on the subject of her voices,
What figures do you see?
I see their faces.
These saints which appear to you, have they hair?
It's good to know.
How do they speak?
This voice is beautiful, sweet and humble, and it speaks the French language.
Does not Saint Margaret speak the English tongue?
How should she speak English since she is not on the side of the English?
Have you any rings?
You have one of mine, give it back to me. The Burgundians have another ring, you have that ring, show it to me.
Who gave you the ring which the Burgundians have?
My father and my mother, and I think that it had written on it the names Jesus Maria. I do not know who had them writ, there was no stone, as I recall. It was given to me in the town of Domremy. It was my brother who gave me that ring.
What have you done with your mandragora?
I have no mandragora, and never had any. I have heard it said that near to my town there is one, but I have never seen any. I have heard it said that it is a thing evil and dangerous to keep, but I know not what use it. I have heard it said that it is a thing to make money come, but I do not believe in that.
Of what form was Saint Michael when he appeared to you?
I saw no crown on him, and of his clothes I know nothing.
Was he naked?
Do you think that God cannot afford to clothe him?
Had he hair?
Why should it have been cut off?
and finally touching the king.
I know well that my king will win the kingdom of France, and I know it as well as I know that you are before me as my judge. I should be dead, were it not for the revelation which comforts me every day.
What sign did you give your king that you were come from God?
I have always told you that you will not drag that out of my mouth. Go and ask him.
Saturday, March 3rd. Jean Beaupre took over the interrogation, directing it towards diverse questions such as the encounter between Joan and Catherine de la Rochelle, her relations with brother Richard. He tried to get her to admit some deeds of witchcraft, such as having caused standards to float round fortresses, etc. He also reverted to the question of her revelations, on which Joan was as firm as ever, and he tried to get from her some prediction touching her own fate.
Have you foreseen or known by revelation that you will escape?
That has nothing to do with your trial. Would you have me say something against myself?
Your voices have told you nothing about it.
It is not to do with your trial. I trust in our Lord who will do his own pleasure. I know neither the hour nor the day the pleasure of God be done.
Have your voices said, in general, anything about that?
Yes, truly. They have told me that I shall be delivered, but I know neither the day nor the hour, and that I boldly put a cheerful face on it.
At this point, the interrogations were suspended for 1 week. Saturday, March 10th. The interrogatory was resumed in the prison and in the presence of a small number of assessors. Jean de La Fontaine undertook the questioning, and his questions bore chiefly on her last campaign, which had taken her to Melun, Crépien Valois, and Campigny. He also alluded to the things which Joan was able to get from the king, horses, money, and to the ennobling of Joan's family.
Have you an escutcheon and arms?
I never had any, but the king has given arms to my brothers, to wit a shield of azure on which were 2 fleurs de lis in gold, and in the middle a sword. I described these arms to a painter because he had asked me what arms I bore. They were given by my king to my brothers, without request from me, and without revelation.
It was in the course of this interrogation that, asked once again about the sign given to the king, she began possibly to throw her judges off the scent, to allude to that sign as to a concrete object, a crown brought by an angel. In the course of the following interrogations, she amplified that image as if at random. It is easy to grasp the symbolic bearing.
What is the sign which you gave to your king when it came to you?
It is good and honorable and right credible, and the richest there be in the world. The sign is in my king's treasury.
Is it of gold, of silver, of precious stones, or a crown?
I shall tell you nothing more. Nobody could describe a thing so rich as the sign.
Monday, March 12th. Jean de La Fontaine again conducted the interrogation. He reverted to the beginnings of her mission, her vow of virginity, her setting out for Vaucouleurs, and he again put to her the question which had been put by Cauchon: would she recite Pater Noster?
Did not your voices call you daughter of God, daughter of the church, great-hearted daughter?
Before the raising of the siege of Orleans, and since, every day when they speak to me, they have often called me Joan the Maid, daughter of God.
Since you are daughter of God, why will you not say Pater Noster?
I will say it willingly, and formerly when I refused to say it, I did so with the intention that the Bishop of Beauvais should hear me in confession.
Tuesday, March 13th. Jean de La Fontaine continued his interrogation.
How did the angel bring the crown? Did he place it on the king's head?
The crown was delivered to him by an archbishop, to wit the Archbishop of Rheims, as I recall, in the presence of my king. And the archbishop received it and gave it to my king. I was present, and the crown was placed in the treasury of my king.
The day when you yourself saw that sign, did your king see it too?
Yes, and it was my king himself who had it.
Of what material was the crown?
It is good to know that it was of fine gold, and this crown was so rich and opulent that I could not number or appreciate all the riches which are in it. And this crown signified that the king would hold the kingdom of France.
Were there precious stones in it?
I have told you all that I know.
There were more questions on the same theme.
Why you rather than another?
It pleased God thus to do, by a simple maid to drive out the king's enemies.
Wednesday, March 14th. Jean de La Fontaine was still the interrogator. Dealing with events of mark in Joan's life, he questioned her especially on her leap from the tower at Beaurevoir, and again about her voices and what they could foretell for her.
Saint Catherine has told me that I shall receive succor, and I know not if it will be by being liberated from prison, or rather whether, being brought to judgment, there would be some trouble by means of which I should be set free. I believe it will be by one or the other, and several times the voices have told me that I should be delivered by great victory. And thereafter my voices say to me, take all in good part, do not whine over thy martyrdom, by it thou shalt come at last to the kingdom of paradise. And this my voices say to me simply and absolutely, that is to say, without fail. I call it martyrdom because of the misery and adversity that I suffer in prison, and I know not if I shall suffer greater misery, but I trust in God.
Since your voices have told you that in the end you would go to paradise, do you hold yourself assured of being saved and of not being damned in hell?
I firmly believe what my voices have told me, to wit that I shall be saved, as firmly as if I were there already.
After that revelation, do you believe that you cannot commit mortal sin?
I know nothing about that, but in all things I trust in God.
That answer is of great weight.
Wherefore I hold it to be a great treasure.
On that day, as also on the preceding one, the interrogation was resumed in the afternoon. Jean de La Fontaine tried to catch her out in the matter of the assurance she seemed to have of her own salvation.
Is there any need for you to confess yourself, since you have revelation from your voices that you will be saved?
I know not if I have sinned mortally, but if I were in mortal sin, I believe that Saints Catherine and Margaret would abandon me at once. I believe that one cannot overdo cleansing one's conscience.
Thursday, March 15th. The interrogation began with this question of her submission to the Church.
If it happens that you have done anything which is against the faith, will you abide by the determination of our Holy Mother Church in whom you should trust?
Let my answers be seen and examined by clerks, and let me be told thereafter if there be in them anything against the Christian faith. I shall be well able to say what there is in it, and thereafter I will say what I have found in it by my counsel. If there be anything bad against the Christian faith which God ordains, I would not maintain it, and I should be right eager to come to the contrary opinion.
The distinction between the Church triumphant and militant, and what pertains to the latter and to the former, has been explained to you. I now ask you to submit yourself to the determination of the Church upon what you have done and said of good, as of evil.
I will make you no other answer for the present.
The remainder of this session was devoted chiefly to the wearing of man's clothes and her apparitions, notably that of St. Michael. Finally, March 24th and 25th, Joan was again visited in her prison, still by only a restricted number of the assessors, but these included all the delegates from the University of Paris. More detailed answers were demanded of her in the matter of certain questions, notably that of wearing man's clothes, which she still refused to change for female attire. It was on this occasion that she gave the answer which, for her, summed up the whole business.
These clothes do not burden my soul, and to wear them is not against the Church.
That concluded the instruction of the case, that is the preliminary examinations. Jean Beaupre was still alive, being 70 years of age at the time of Joan's rehabilitation. He was interrogated during the royal inquiry in 1450. His memory was still colored by resentment.
She was right subtle, with a subtlety pertaining to woman.
The second phase of the trial, the ordinary hearing, began on Monday, March 26th. On that day and the next, the act of accusation drawn up by the prosecutor, Jean d'Estevit, was read to the assembled assessors. It was interrupted by Joan at the end of almost every clause with a denial of its contents, or with,
I abide in that by what I said elsewhere.
questioned as to the manner in which she summons her voices, she answers,
I call upon God and Our Lady that they send me counsel and comfort, and thereafter they send it to me.
Asked by what exact words she summons them, she replies in this fashion in French.
Most gentle God, in honor of your holy passion I call upon you, if you love me, that you reveal to me how I should answer these churchmen. I know well as to the clothes the commandment whereby I assumed them, but I know not in what manner I should leave them off. For this please you to teach me.
On Saturday, March 31st, Joan was again questioned in her prison on the particular point of her submission to the Church.
Will you confide yourself to the judgment of the Church which is on earth in all that you have said and done both good and evil, and especially in the cases, crimes and misdemeanors of which you are accused, and in all touching your trial?
On that which is asked of me, I will abide by the Church militant provided it does not command anything impossible to do. And what I call impossible is that I should revoke the deeds I have done and said, and what I have declared concerning the visions and apparitions sent to me by God. I shall not revoke them for anything whatsoever. That which our Lord has made me do and commanded and will command, I shall not fail to do for any man alive, and in the case of the Church willing me to do otherwise and contrary to the commandment which has been given me by God, I should not do it for anything whatsoever.
If the Church militant tells you that your revelations are illusions or things diabolical, will you abide by the Church?
In that I will always abide by God whose commandment I have always done, and I know well that that which is contained in the proceedings comes by the commandment of God, and that which I affirm in those proceedings to have done by God's commandment, it would have been impossible for me to do the contrary. And in the case of the Church militant commanding me to do the contrary, I should not abide by any man in the world but only by our Sire who's good.
Do you not believe that you owe submission to God's Church on earth? That is, to our Lord the Pope, to the cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and other prelates of the Church?
Yes, our Sire being first served.
Have you commandment from your voices not to submit yourself to the Church militant which is on earth, nor to its judgment?
I shall not answer otherwise than I take into my head, but what I answer is by the commandment of my voices. They do not command me that I obey not the church God first served.
Meanwhile, another act of accusation, more precise than Jean d'Estavet's woolly and verbose prose, was drawn up to serve as a basis for the rest of the trial. During the course of the trial of rehabilitation, some interesting details were given about this proceeding by the notaries.
It was decided by the councillors, and especially by those who had come from Paris, that, as was usual, out of all these articles and responses, there should be made a few short articles, and that the principal points should be summarized to present the matter briefly in order that the deliberations could be better done and more rapidly. It was for that the 12 articles were drawn up, but it was not I who did them, and I do not know who composed or extracted them.
How was it done, asked the promoter of the trial of rehabilitation, that such a multitude of articles and responses could be reduced to 12 articles, especially in a form so remote from Joan's confessions? It does not seem very likely that such important men would have thus composed these articles.
I think that in the principal text of the proceedings done in French, I inserted the truth of the interrogations and articles drawn up by the promoter and the judges, and of Joan's answers. As for the 12 articles, I refer them to those who composed them, whom I did not dare to gainsay any more than my companion.
When the 12 articles were inserted, did you collate those articles with Joan's answers to see if they corresponded with those answers?
I do not remember.
Now at this point Manchon was shown a folio in his own handwriting, extracted from the dossier which he himself had produced before the Court of Rehabilitation and dated April 4, 1431. On this folio Manchon had noted the discrepancies between certain of the articles in question and Joan's answers. The fact is that, as in the earlier and longer act of accusation, certain of the articles expressed the very opposite to what Joan had, in fact, answered. For example, the reply given under the head of submission to the Church becomes,
She will not submit herself to the determination of the Church militant, but to God only.
Do you believe that these articles were composed in a spirit of truth? For there is a great difference between these articles and Joan's answers.
What is in my text of the proceedings is true. As for the articles, I refer them to those who did them, for it was not I who did them.
Were the decisions based on the whole proceedings or on these 12 articles?
I believe that the decisions were not based on the full proceedings, for it had not yet been put in form and was not drafted into the form it has now until after Joan's death, but the decisions were made on the 12 articles.
Were these 12 articles read by Joan?
No!
Consultations and deliberations went on from April 5th. On the 12th, there was a deliberation in which the masters from the University of Paris played the preponderant part. A letter was subsequently drawn up by them accusing Joan of relying upon false revelations, of erring in her faith in claiming that the articles of faith were not better founded than her own revelations, and finally of being guilty of idolatry, schism, heresy, blasphemy, vaingloriousness, etc. Cauchon was careful thereafter to place this letter with the 12 articles before the other assessors when they were called into consultation. 11 advocates of the Rouen officiality expressed reservations, and 3 of the assessors, bachelors of theology, Pierre Minier, Jean Pigesh, and Richard de Grouchet, were in disagreement with Cauchon. If these revelations proceed from God or from a good spirit, which however for us is not self-evident, they could not be taken as evil. It is only from certain indications and from the evidence given at the trial of rehabilitation, when Rouen had been liberated and lips could be unsealed, that we know of the resistance which Cauchon encountered. It should be noted, to start with, that the canons of Rouen were in no hurry to give their opinion. Having called an assembly of the chapter for the first time on April 13th, they found that there were too few of them present to enable them to deliberate. Cauchon had summoned them to hold a third chapter, which they did on May 4th, and at this one the canons pronounced Joan guilty. Meanwhile Joan in her prison had fallen ill. The Duchess of Bedford's physician, Jean Tiffany, was sent to treat her. He gave an account of this occasion during the trial of rehabilitation. The physician, Guillaume de la Chambre, then the Earl of Warwick, told us that Joan has been ill, as had been reported to him, and that he had sent for us that we might take care of her, for not for anything in the world would the king have her die a natural death. The king, indeed, held her dear, for he had bought her dear, and would not have her die excepting at the hands of justice, and that she be burnt. As soon as she was thus better, came one Master Jean d'Estavet, who exchanged insulting words with Joan and called her whore wanton. She was by this so irritated that she became feverish again and fell ill again. That came to the Earl's knowledge, who forbade Destavit to insult Joan thenceforth. On Wednesday, April 18th, Joan being still sick and confined to her bed, the first charitable admonition was administered to her. Into her cell went Cauchon, the Vice-Inquisitor Jean Lemaitre, 3 masters from the University of Paris, Jacques de Touraine, Nicolas Maidi and Gerard Feuillet, an English clerk William Hayton, and 3 other men. It was Cauchon himself who undertook the admonitions. He first proposed to Joan that she should choose among the assessors composing the court who would be her counsel. He pointed out that if she would not take counsel or follow the Church's advice, she was in great danger.
It seems to me, in view of the sickness that I have, that I am in great danger of death. And if it be so that God would do his will upon me, I ask to have confession and the sacrament of the Eucharist and to be buried in holy ground.
If you have the sacraments of the Church, you must declare yourself a good Catholic and submit to the Church.
I am not able to say anything else to you at present.
The more you fear for your life because of the sickness which you have, the more should you amend your ways.
If my body dies in prison, I expect you to put it in holy ground, and if you do not have it put there, I expect it of God.
Since you ask that the Church give you the sacrament of the Eucharist, will you submit yourself to the Church militant, and a promise to give you that sacrament would be given you?
I shall not do otherwise about that submission. God I love, I serve him and am a good Christian, and I would help and sustain the Church with all my power.
Would you have us order a beautiful and notable procession to restore you to a proper state, if you are not in such a state?
I should indeed like the Church and Catholics to pray for me.
A second admonition took place on May 2nd. With her health restored, Joan had recovered her attitude of defiance. It is probable that an episode which the official account leaves out, as it leaves out the opinions given by Jean de Saint-Avit and Jean Lawyer. The questioning was undertaken by Jean de Chatelain.
Will you correct and amend yourself according to the decision of the doctors?
Read your book and then I will answer you. I trust in God my Creator in all. I love him with all my heart.
Will you answer more fully to this general admonition?
I trust in my Judge, that is King of heaven and earth.
Will you submit to the Church militant?
I believe indeed in the Church here below, but for my deeds and sayings, as I said formerly, I trust in and abide by our Lord. I do believe that the Church militant cannot be at fault nor fail, but as for my sayings and deeds, I place them and refer them in all to God who has made me do all that I have done.
Do you mean that you have no judge upon earth? Our Holy Father, the Pope, is not he your judge?
I shall say nothing else to you about this. I have a good master, God to wit, in whom I trust in all things and not in another.
If you will not believe in the Church and believe in the article Unum Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, you are a heretic in maintaining that, and other judges may punish you with the pain of fire.
I shall say nothing else to you about this, and if I saw the fire, I should say all that I am saying and do not otherwise.
If the Holy Council General and our Holy Father the Pope, the cardinals and others of the Church were here, would you refer and submit to that Holy Council?
You will get nothing else out of me.
Will you submit to our Holy Father the Pope?
Take me to him, and I will answer him.
Wednesday, May 9th, Joan was taken to the great tower of Rouen Castle. It still survives and is the only vestige of the ancient fortress of Bouveuil. The judges were accompanied by only a reduced number of assessors, and in their presence Joan was threatened with torture. She was called upon thereafter to speak the truth on various points in the trial, which she has denied or in which she has answered in a lying fashion.
Truly, though you were to have my limbs torn off and send the soul out of my body, I should not say otherwise. And if I did tell you otherwise, I should always thereafter say that you had made me speak so by force. At the last feast of the Holy Cross, May 3rd, I had comfort from Saint Gabriel, and I believed that it was Saint Gabriel, and I learned it from my voice that it was Saint Gabriel. I asked counsel of my voices if I should submit myself to the Church, since churchmen were pressing me hard to submit myself to the Church. And these voices told me that if I wanted God to help me, I must trust in him for all I did. I know well that God has always been the master of all that I have done, and that the devil has never had power over my deeds. I have asked my voices whether I shall be burnt, and my voices have answered me that I should trust in our Lord, and that he would help me.
About the sign of the crown of which you say that it was delivered to you by the Archbishop of Rheims, will you abide by what that Archbishop says?
Bring him here, and then I will answer you. I would not dare to say the opposite of what I have told you.
Thereupon, the masters present decided to put off the torture, and to deliberate first as to whether or not it should be applied to her. Saturday, May 12th, Cauchon assembled 12 of the assessors to discuss the question of whether Joan was to be put to the torture. Only 3 among them gave an affirmative opinion: Thomas de Courcelles of Paris University, Nicolas Loiseleur, and one Aubert Morel, doctor of canon law, whose appearance at sittings of the court were few and far between. The English, however, were becoming impatient. On Sunday, May 13th, the Earl gave a grand dinner. First among the guests were the Bishop of Beauvais, Pierre Cauchon, and the Bishop of Noyon, Jean de Mailly. Also present were certain persons who had played important parts in Joan's life: John of Luxembourg, his brother Louis, Chancellor of France, Humphrey. What decisions were taken at that dinner on May 13th? What is certain is that thereafter events came much faster. On the following day, May 14th, the University of Paris met in plenary session to deliberate on the 12 articles of accusation which had been sent to it with a letter from Cauchon and another from the King of England, which letters can have left no doubt as to what the tendency of the deliberations ought to be. Not that there was any need to bring pressure to bear on that assembly as to the conclusion it was desired to come to, considering the unequivocal proofs of devotion which the University had long given to the English cause. The deliberations concluded by finding Joan guilty of being a schismatic, an apostate, a liar, a soothsayer, suspect of heresy, of erring in the faith, and being a blasphemer of God and the saints. A letter to the King of England, in support of these conclusions, was drawn up by the masters, who wrote, "Your most noble Magnificenc has commenced a right good work touching our holy faith, to wit the judicial proceedings against the woman known as the Maid and her scandals, faults and offences so manifest throughout this kingdom. We humbly implore your excellent highness that very diligently this matter be brought swiftly to an end, for verily length and dilation is most perilous, and it is very necessary to make in this notable and great reparation for that the people who, by this woman, have been mightily scandalized, be led back into good and holy doctrine and belief." As soon as he received these conclusions, so favorable to his cause, Cauchon hastened to assemble the assessors for a session of the court on Saturday, May 19th. After the letters and conclusions from the university had been read, the assessors were called upon, each for his opinion. Most of them, as we might expect, gave an opinion in the same sense as that of the authority par excellence of that time, the University of Paris. A few only had reservations, notably Brother Isambard de la Pire, who referred the court to the first deliberations he had put before it, and who insisted that Joan be warned again. On Wednesday, May 23rd, Joan appeared before the court in a room in the castle near to her prison cell, to be solemnly exhorted by one of the university masters, Pierre Maurice, to renounce her errors and scandals. A long and verbose exhortation was answered by Joan as follows:
The way that I have always spoken and held to in this trial, that will I still maintain. And if I was brought to judgment and saw the fire lit and the faggots ready, and the executioner ready to stoke the fire, and that I be within the fire, yet should I not say otherwise, and should maintain what I have said in the trial even unto death.
It was at this point that it was decided to set a scene designed to shake her. On Thursday, May 24th, in the cemetery of St. Ouen, a scaffold and tribune were erected. Here Joan was to be brought and threatened with burning unless she made public abjuration. The great prelates were all present. The scene was presided over by the Bishop of Winchester, Henry Beaufort, known as the Cardinal of England. He was Bedford's uncle and Henry VI's great-uncle. With him sat the Bishop of Beauvais and Noyon, Louis of Luxembourg, Bishop of Thérouanne, and William Olnwick, Keeper of the Privy Seal and member of the Grand Council of the Crown. The principal assessors were also present, and a crowd had collected all round the platforms. Joan was brought out to a tribune facing the prelates. At her side was the usher, Jean Massieu, who was, as always, delegated to accompany her. Isambard de la Pire: I was present at the first preaching to Joan, which was done by Master Guillaume Erard, who took as his text, "The branch can produce no fruits if it stay not on the vine," saying that in France there never had been such a monster as Joan was, who was a magician, heretic, schismatic, and that the king who was favorable to her was like unto her, in that he had tried to recover his kingdom with the help of such a heretical woman. He added, because of that, I believe that they were moved, among other things, by the desire to defame the royal majesty. This impression was confirmed by other witnesses, such as Martin Ladvenu and Jean Massieu himself. Jean Massieu, when she was brought to St. Ouen to be preached to by Master Guillaume Erard, during the preaching at about halfway, when Joan had been greatly blamed by the preacher's words, he began to shout in a loud voice, saying,
Ah, France, thou art much abused. Thou hast always been the most Christian country. And Charles, who calls himself king and of the ruler, has adhered like a heretic and schismatic to the words and deeds of a woman vain and defamed and of all dishonor full, and not him only but all the clergy in his obedience and lordship, by whom she was examined and not corrected, as she has said.
Then, addressing himself to Joan, he said, raising his finger,
It is to thee, Joan, that I speak, and I tell thee that thy king is a heretic and schismatic.
By my faith, sir, with respect, I dare to tell you and swear to you on pain of my life that he is the noblest Christian of all the Christians, and who better loves the faith and the church, and is not such as you say.
Then the preacher said to me.
Make her be silent.
After his sermon, the preacher said to Joan,
Here be my lords the judges, who many times have summoned and required of you that you submit all your deeds and sayings to our holy mother the church, and that in those deeds and sayings there be many things which, as it seems to the clerks, were not good to say and maintain.
I will answer you. As for the matter of submission to the church, I have answered on that point. Of all the works I have accomplished, let them be sent to Rome to our Holy Father the Sovereign Pontiff, in whom, and in God first, I trust. As for my sayings and deeds, I have done them as from God. And with them I charge no man, neither my king nor any other. And if fault there be, it is in me and no other.
Will you revoke all your sayings and deed which are reproved by the clerks?
I abide by God and our Holy Father the Pope.
and it was said to her that this did not suffice, and that to go for the Pope to such a great distance could not be done, that the ordinaries were judges, each in his own diocese, and that it was necessary that she throw herself upon the Holy Church, and that she abide by what the clerks and other learned men said, and had determined on her sayings and deeds. Guillaume Erard repeated his exhortation 3 times. Here follows what Massieu, charged with reading to Joan the form of abjuration which she was called upon to sign, had to say. When Joan was required to sign this document, there was a great murmuring among those who were present. Then Joan, pressed to sign, answered,
Let this paper be seen by the clerks, and by the church into whose hands I must be put. If they advise me that I should sign it, and to do as I am told, I will do it willingly.
Do it now, if not this day shalt thou end thy days by fire.
Then Joan answered that she would rather sign than be burnt, and at that moment there was a great tumult in the crowd which was there, and stones were thrown. The intervention of the English in this scene was constant, as it was behind the scenes throughout the trial. This was attested by Haymon de Macy. Some time thereafter, i.e., after the above scene of May 13th, I was still in Rouen. Joan was taken to a place before St. Ouen, where was preached to her a sermon by Master Nicholas Mighty. Among other things he said to her, as I heard, Joan, we have such pity for you. You must retract what you have said, or we shall hand you over to secular justice. But she answered that she had done nothing bad, and that she believed in the 12 articles of the faith and in the 10 precepts of the Decalogue, saying thereafter that she referred her case to the court of Rome, and would believe all that the Holy Church believed. Despite that, she was hard-pressed to retract, but she said to them, You take great pains to lead me astray that, and to avoid the danger she would do all that they wanted. Then the secretary of the King of England, who was there, called Laurent Callot, drew from his sleeve a little written sagel which he held out to Joan that she might sign it, and she answered that she could neither read nor write. Despite which this Laurent Callot, secretary, handed Joan the paper and a pen that she might sign, and by way of derision Joan drew a circle. Then Laurent Callot seized Joan's hand with the pen in it, and made Joan make a mark which I no longer remember.
Who composed the sagel which is contained in the proceedings, and which begins with, I, Joan, etc., who urged the judges to condemn her to perpetual imprisonment, whereas they had promised her that she would not be punished.
I think that happened because of the diversity of powers, the 2 powers who then shared France between them, and because they were afraid that she might escape.
Why have you assumed this male attire, and who made you take it?
I have taken it of my own will. I have taken it because it is more licit and fitting to have man's clothes, since I am with men, than to have woman's clothes. I have resumed it because what had been promised me has not been observed, to wit that I should go to Mass and should receive the body of Christ and should be taken out of irons.
Have you not made abjuration, and promised especially not to resume man's clothes?
I would rather die than remain in irons. But if it be permitted me to go to Mass and I be taken out of irons, and that I be put in a gracious prison, and that I have women, I will be good and will do what the Church wishes.
Since that Thursday, have you heard the voices of Saints Catherine and Margaret?
Yes,
What did they tell you?
God has sent to me by Saints Catherine and Margaret great pity for the mighty betrayal to which I consented in making abjuration and revocation to save my life, and that I was damning myself to save my life.
Here the clerk has noted in the margin mortal answer.
Before Thursday, my voices had told me what I was going to do that day, and what I then did. My voices told me, when I was on the scaffold and the tribune before the people, that I should reply boldly to that preacher who was then preaching. He was a false preacher, and he said I had done many things which I have not done. If I said that God had not sent me, I should damn myself. It is true that God sent me. My voices have since told me that I did a great injury in confessing that I had not done well in what I had done. All that I said and revoked that Thursday, I did only because of fear of the fire.
Do you believe that the voices which come to you are those of Saints Catherine and Margaret,
Yes, and that they are from God.
and the crown which you mentioned?
In all, I told you the truth at the trial, as best I could.
You said upon the scaffold and the tribune, before us, judges, and before others and before the people, when you made abjuration, that it was falsely that you had boasted that those voices were the voices of Saints Catherine and Margaret.
I did not mean to do and say so. I did not say or mean to revoke my apparitions, to wit that they were Saints Catherine and Margaret. And all I have done I did for fear of the fire, and I revoked nothing, but the revocation was against the truth. I would rather make my penitence once and for all, that is to say die, than to suffer any longer the pain of being in prison. I have never done anything against God and against the faith, whatever I may have been made to revoke. And for what was contained in the Sagil of Abjuration, I did not understand it. I did not mean to revoke anything unless provided it pleased God. If the judges wish it, I will resume woman's clothes. For the rest, I will do nothing about it.
On Wednesday, May 30th, in the morning there came to Joan in her cell brother Martin Ladvenu, chosen by Cauchon to inform her of the fate in store for her. A young brother of Ladvenu's convent, brother Jean Tautmoilet, went with him, and he has left us an account of the scene. The day that Joan was abandoned to secular justice and delivered up to be burned, I went in the morning to the prison with brother Martin Ladvenu, whom the Bishop of Beauvais had sent to her to announce her imminent death, and to induce in her true contrition and penitence, and also to hear her confession. The which the said Ladvenu did very thoroughly and charitably. And when he announced to the poor woman the death which she must die that day, that so had her judges ordained, and understood and heard the hard and cruel death which was almost upon her, she began to cry out grievously and pitiably pulled and tore out her hair.
Alas, do they treat me thus horribly and cruelly, so that my body, clean and whole, which was never corrupted, must be this day consumed and reduced to ashes. Ah, I had rather 7 times be decapitated than to be thus burned. Alas, had I been in the ecclesiastical prison to which I submitted myself, and been guarded by men of the church and not by my enemies and adversaries, it had not so wretchedly happened to me as now it has. Ah, I appeal before God, the great judge, from the great wrongs and grievances being done to me.
And she complained marvelously in that place of the oppressions and violences which had been done to her in the prison by the jailers, and by others who had been let in against her. After these complaints came the aforesaid bishop, to whom she immediately said,
Bishop, I die by you.
He began to remonstrate with her, saying,
Ah, Joan, have patience herein. You die because you held not to what you had promised and are returned to your first evil doing.
And the poor maid answered him,
Alas, if you had put me in the prisons of the court of the church, and into the hands of competent and fitting ecclesiastical keepers, this would not have happened. That is why I appeal against you before God.
That done, I went out and heard no more. This deposition is completed by that of the usher Jean Massieu. The Wednesday morning, the day that Joan died, brother Martin Ladvenu heard her confession, and Joan's confession heard, he sent me to the Bishop of Beauvais to notify him that he had heard her in confession, and asked that the sacrament of the Eucharist be given her. The bishop called together several persons on that matter. After their deliberation, he told me to tell brother Martin that he was to give her the sacrament of the Eucharist, and all that she asked for. The body of Jesus Christ was carried to her irreverently without stole or light, at which brother Martin, who had confessed her, was ill pleased. Wherefore I was sent back to fetch a stole and the light, and so brother Martin administered it. And that done, she was taken to the old market, and at her side were brother Martin and me, accompanied by more than 800 men of war with axes and swords, and she, being at the old market, as much by her pious and devout lamentations and invocations of the blessed Trinity, and of the blessed glorious Virgin Mary, and of all the blessed saints of paradise, naming expressly several of these saints in the which devotions, lamentations, and true confessions of faith, as in requesting also of all manner of people of what condition and estate soever, whether of her own party or the other, pardon most humbly, requesting that they would pray for her, forgiving them the evil that they had done her. She persevered and continued a very long space of time, as about half an hour, and so to the end, at which the judges there present and even several Englishmen were provoked to tears and to weeping, and indeed most bitterly wept at it. After his sermon, the definitive sentence was spoken by Peer Cauchon himself.
We declare that thou, Joan, commonly called the Maid, art fallen into diverse errors and diverse crimes of schism, idolatry, invocation of devils, and numerous others. And thereafter, after abjuration of thine errors, it is evident that thou hast returned to those same errors and to those crimes, your heart having been beguiled by the author of schism and heresy. Wherefore we declare thee relapsed and heretic.
Joan should at this point have been conducted to the secular judges, who alone were qualified to decide the actual sentence and apply it. But Cauchon, in haste to have done with it, neglected that formality. Sheriff's Lieutenant Laurent Gesden, I was at the last sermon delivered at the old market of Rouen. I was there with the sheriff, for at the time I was lieutenant of the sheriff. The sentence was pronounced whereby Joan was abandoned to secular justice. As soon as possible after this sentence, immediately and without delay, she was delivered into the hands of the sheriff, and without the sheriff or myself, to whom it appertained to pronounce sentence, having pronounced one, the executioner, without further ado, seized Joan and took her to the place where the wood was ready, and she was burned. Jean Massieu, when she was abandoned by the church, I was still with her, and with great devoutness she asked to have the cross. Hearing that, an Englishman who was present made a little cross of wood from the end of a stick, which he gave her, and devoutly she received and kissed it, making pious lamentations to God our Redeemer, who had suffered on the cross, for our redemption, of which cross she had sign and representation. And she put this cross into her bosom, between her flesh and her clothes, and furthermore asked humbly that I enable her to have the cross from the church, so that she could have it continually before her eyes until death. The pious woman asked, requested, and begged me, as I was near her at her end, that I would go to the nearby church and fetch the cross to hold it raised right before her eyes until the threshold of death, that the cross which God hung upon be continually before her eyes in her lifetime. Being in the flames, she ceased not until the end to proclaim and confess aloud the holy name of Jesus, imploring and invoking without cease the help of the saints in paradise. And what is more, in giving up the ghost and bowing her head, uttered the name of Jesus as a sign that she was fervent in the faith of God. Brother Isambart de la Pierre, the executioner, on the same day after the midday meal, came to the convent of the preaching friars and said to me, as to Brother Martin Ladvenu, that he greatly feared to be damned, for he had burned a holy woman. As for the feelings of the man who had managed the whole business, Peer Cauchon, we know nothing unless we judge by the steps he took during the days following the execution, and which seemed to reveal in him at least a certain nervous irritability. There was first the imprisonment of the preaching friar Pierre Bosquier, condemned to prison on bread and water until the following Easter for having said, on the afternoon of the day of the execution, that they who had judged Joan had done ill. On June 12 following, Cauchon obtained for himself and the principal assessors letters of warranty from the King of England. By these letters the king promises that, on the word of a king, if it come about that any one of the persons who worked in the trial be brought to trial, summoned, sued for that trial or its dependencies, we will aid and defend, have aided and defended in court of law and without, such persons at our own cost and expense. One of the prelates who had taken an active part in the trial, the Bishop of Noyon, Jean de Mailly, was greatly embarrassed when, at the trial of rehabilitation, he was reminded of these letters of warranty. Of the three prelates mentioned at the time of the promulgation of the definitive sentence, he was the sole survivor, since Cauchon and Louis of Luxembourg were both dead. For the English, Joan's death was followed by an immediate resumption of military operations. On June 2, that same Laurent Callot, who had guided Joan's hand in making her sign the abjuration with a cross, signed an indent on the English Crown Treasurer, Thomas Blount, for money to finance the construction of war machines for the siege of Louviers. Jean Riquier, it was commonly said that the English did not dare lay siege to Louviers until Joan was dead. Among others, I heard Master Pierre Maurice and Nicolas Loiseleur and others whom I no longer remember, say that the English so feared her that they did not dare, while she still lived, lay siege to Louviers, and that it was necessary to humor them, that a trial would be quickly made against her, and that therein they would find occasion for her death. Meanwhile, the University of Paris and Bedford himself, acting for the King of England, hastened to make known to all that Joan had died at the stake as a heretic. An official letter was sent to the Emperor, to the King, to the Dukes and other princes and all Christendom, 8th June 1431. This woman, who had herself called Joan the Maid, had for 2 years and more against divine law and her condition as of the feminine sex, worn male attire, a thing abominable to God, and in that state conveyed to our capital enemy, to whom and to those of his party, churchmen, nobles, and common people, she gave it often to be understood that she was sent by God. The University of Paris, meanwhile, was sending its own letter to the Pope, and the College of Cardinals to inform them of what had been done with its full approbation. Meanwhile Clement de Fauquemberg, clerk to the Parliament, was noting in his register, the 30th day of May 1431, by trial of the Church Joan, who called herself the Maid, who had been taken in a sortie from the town of Campigny by the men of Messieurs John of Luxembourg, was burned in the town of Rouen, and there was written on the mitre she had on her head the following words, heretic, relapsed, apostate, idolater, and on a placard before the scaffold where the said Joan was, were written these words, Joan, self-styled the Maid, liar, pernicious, abuser of the people, soothsayer, superstitious, blasphemer of God, presumptuous, misbeliever in the faith of Jesus Christ, boaster, idolater, cruel, dissolute, invoker of devils, apostate, schismatic, and heretic. Finally, the letter addressed by the King of England to the Duke of Burgundy relating Joan's death. Most dear and well-beloved uncle, the fervent delectation which we know that you have as a true Catholic prince in our Holy Mother Church, and the exaltation of our holy faith exhorts, and admonishes us to signify to you, and write that to the honor of our Mother the Holy Church, has been solemnly accomplished extirpation of errors in our town of Rouen. This woman, who had herself styled Joan the Maid, was taken by secular justice to the old market within Rouen, and there was publicly burned in sight of the whole people.